Good morning and welcome to another edition of Sharpe Takes. This morning I am pleased to have a relatively new superintendent in the Middlebury area, Dr. Wendy Baker, who comes from a long line of families starting in Panton 9 generations ago. So she has some family roots here in the state and has come back to be the superintendent in the Middlebury area. We also have a connection because we both love basketball and have participated at various levels of basketball throughout our lives. So, life is basketball, and welcome, Dr. Baker. It's delightful to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'd like to stay with our theme that we've been working on, with public education. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there, and how do we pay for it? So let's start with where we are. What did you find when you arrived, and what are the challenges currently?
I came to Addison Central in June. I started full-time in June after having been out of public ed for about 10 years. I started my career in public ed in Vermont in 1993 as a middle school teacher, and then worked as a school improvement specialist in the first team, in Vermont at the Vermont Department of Ed, and then went into administration from there. And when I came back after working in higher ed, predominantly for a 10-year period, I found the state to be in a very different place. When I left in 2013, there were lots of resources in place to ensure that we had exceptionally high quality classrooms and classroom instruction and assessment systems and ways to work and collaborate together to really build wonderful educational opportunities for kids. And now much of that seems quite shaken at the state level. And so it feels very different now than it did when I was here in 2013.
So I think two big things have happened. One is that the State Department of Education has been chronically underfunded, and I think you have a better perspective than I do on this, but it seems to me that they have less capability of supporting school districts throughout the state.
That could be. I mean, no matter what decade you look at, I think the AOE's always been somewhat underfunded in that way. And having worked at the Agency of Ed, I remember certainly feeling that way. We were stretched thin. It feels in some respects that the focus is different. 10 years ago, there was a lot of emphasis placed on relationships throughout the state, collaborative relationships between the AOE, superintendents, school boards, leagues of cities and towns, many different stakeholders that all came together to pull our education system into a place where it was really a point of pride. And it feels as though there's maybe more focus on systems and ways in which we're doing things maybe efficiently, which is important. But I don't feel the same collaborative relational approach across the state that seem to yield so much promise.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm finding my way through it still. We're only 7 or 8 months in here, but it's a stark difference, and I'm hoping to rebuild some of those things.
Yeah. How are the kids doing?
I think the kids are doing well. They're loved, and I think by and large, the kids in Addison Central enjoy coming to school, and they're happy while they're at school, and they're doing some fun things. They're learning, and their teachers are dedicated, and so all of those things are in place, and that's helpful. I was actually just at a wonderful presentation that some of our high school students were doing at the Eastview nearby.
Yeah.
They, as part of their 20th century modern history class, were interviewing some of the residents and about their lives and about the things that they valued and what that looks like. And turns out the students continued to come back for further conversations and made some real bonds. And so there those kinds of community activities that that kids have done for decades in Vermont as part of their education are still in place, and I think are part of what are contributing to happy kids.
It's wonderful to hear that the school's making that effort to connect. A piece of news came out yesterday from the Secretary of State's office that a survey indicated that only 17% of students envision ever voting. That's amazing to me.
I saw that, yep.
And so somehow we need to make those connections better, and have students understand how important voting is. I think we saw that in the last election, how so many people didn't go to the polls and now are stuck with what they've got, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
And if they understood better or were more interested in buying into the democratic process, things might be different.
I think what older generations, I put myself now in that category, understand is the value of community. And the value of community is one of the things that spurs the importance of voting. You vote in your local elections and for local initiatives, whether to buy a fire truck or not. And so on and so forth, and all of that comes from a strong sense of community. And the high school students I just spoke of that were in Tara Martin's class, she did a wonderful job of preparing the kids and arranging for the opportunity. I think part of why they really enjoy the conversations is because the community members there took an interest in them. Yeah. And they took an interest in turn in them, and they learned what it meant to be part of a selfless generation, and one that was really tied to the sense of goodwill for your neighbors and what that looks like, and with all the personalization that today's society has in it, it's important to be anchored to some of those things, and I think that felt new for kids in some respects, which was nice.
Yeah. Kids going into Eastview, I know that some of the students at the Hannaford Center have been going out and testing waters and trying to see about improving the water system in the state. I think these collaborations and this connection of students to the real world, if you will, is really important. And are there ways we can enhance that? Is money getting in the way of doing this? What do we need to do to get more of those connections going forward?
I don't think money is getting in the way. Our high school, Middlebury High School, actually in this budget that the board has just adopted, that will be before the community before too long, has an expansion of what is called in the Vermont legislation a flexible pathway, program where I think kids will be able to do a lot more of that type of thing, where they can have internships arranged, other pathways to graduation, to earning credit that. It's not necessarily, the Career Center is a wonderful place and a wonderful model, but it's not necessarily for every kid. For some kids, they're interested in more of those independently organized community connections and paths that might be in areas that the high school doesn't currently have coursework around. And neither does the Career Center, but yet, it's something that is a post-secondary interest for kids. And so I would say that, pending voter approval, we will have far more robust opportunities very shortly, for high school students to be able to do much more of that. That used to be something that was in place more for kids, and I don't know if the pandemic, created a significant enough interruption in some of those things that the momentum of that was lost, but we're picking that up again, and that feels good.
Yeah, the pandemic certainly did sort of get everybody to stay at home or stay in their school building or,
Yeah.
or whatever, and not get out and be involved in the community. And it's refreshing to see that that's beginning to happen across the board. People are going to movies again and out to dinner and those sorts of things. It's taken really a long time.
Yep.
And I would say that we haven't fully recovered yet from the impacts of COVID. So you've prepared a budget under, some difficult circumstances. How tough was it, and did you have to create a lot of cuts? What's the budget bill look like in terms of what taxpayers are going to pay? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, Addison Central, I think, was in a unique position in the county in that it had just come off of 2 years of transitional superintendencies with Peters last year and then an interim last year. And as I read when I was transitioning in, everyone was waiting, for the new superintendent to determine
everything.
how we were going to move forward. And so we had a heavy lift this fall in sorting some things out. We certainly heard the call to ensure that at the very least taxes didn't increase anymore. And there were some people who I think would be very appreciative of some relief of the education spending portion of property taxes. We also heard from the community that they really valued the programs that we have and the educational experiences we have, and they didn't want to see any of those go away. We also heard that people value excellence here in terms of academic success and some concern about students' mental health and our ability to support students well so that they could achieve, in ways that the community has come to expect over time. And so our approach to budgeting this year was one where it's slightly unusual in that we departed from an index-based budgeting process where you kind of determine what percentage you're going to be able to apply to your budget as you bring it forward. And we started with a zero basis, so we started from scratch, and we just kind of put pieces together in what Matt Corrente, our Director of Finance and Operations, called sort of the building blocks of our budget. So, block 1 was operations, block 2 were tuition payments, block 3 were requirements, and so on.
Yeah.
And so that was a financial process we went through where we showed every dollar, in our budget, not just the general fund dollars, but also the grant dollars. Every dollar we built up, so that the public in these budget documents will be able to see where we're spending every dollar, that no matter where it's coming from. And we also took a look at the strategic plan that the board passed a year ago in October and said, okay, this is the first full budget year of that. So what do we need in order to really be able to move that forward? Much of that had to do with student success. Their target is that by 2029, 80% of our students are reading and performing mathematics on grade level. And so as we are on the other side, perhaps, of the pandemic, maybe ready again to be able to support kids to focus in a more rigorous way on their academics. We built in some resources to be able to make that a very strong focus in this next year. And I think, this is a strong budget that provides good opportunities for kids. I talked about the high school opportunities and in the K-8s, really thinking about how can we strengthen our math instruction across the board and ensure that our literacy instruction is available to all of our kids. I think everyone in Addison Central, pending any legislative changes to any of the formula pieces.
And they will change.
Right. So if nothing changed right now, all of our Addison Central towns would see a tax decrease. For anywhere from, I think Matt's calculations are 5% to almost 50%, which hopefully will provide the relief that's really important for our families.
Yeah. So a couple of things came to mind as you were talking about this. I think there's pretty strong evidence that if you're not with your peer group in reading and math in particular by third grade, it is very difficult to catch up after that. So is there going to be additional focus, or how do you go about helping the kids that come in with a deficit to begin with? Day one, they're behind their peers, and how do you get them to catch up, and what kind of process goes on in Addison Central for that?
Yeah, Addison Central's done actually some really good work in the K-1-2s in the last few years. Heather Gibo is our Director of Literacy, and she has implemented an approach to reading that has both the science side and the whole language side. That's the pendulum in reading. And so that is feeling very good. I think where we need to do some work is in the 3, 4, 5s, in making sure that their vocabulary development continues to grow, and so comprehension comes into play. At grades 3 and 4, it's really you're now reading to learn. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that the statistic you're kind of thinking about as you're explaining, your perspective on reading comes from. It's you have to read to learn as opposed to learn to read. So generally speaking, we're doing a good job in the learning to read. What we're really focused on right now is continuing to support kids as they're doing that comprehension. That helps them be critical thinkers, throughout that program. So that's where a lot of the productive struggle comes in for kids, and supporting kids to take risks and to do something that they're not sure they can do, and persevere through that. That's something that our staff is working hard to do. It's with so much instant gratification available, in the digital world, it's you have to take a different approach sometimes to helping kids do some of those things that are that take more than one try. So
you talk about kids taking risks. What just came to mind is, like, kids love to take risks. It's just we want them to take safe risks, so to speak, or learning risks, right, rather than dangerous risks.
Productive struggle is what we like. Yes.
Okay. So that's at the beginning stages of a child's education. I've often thought that. We do a pretty good job in getting kids ready for college. What we don't do is we don't help kids get into trades very well. And the separation of the tech centers from the high schools exacerbates that. I think it's difficult for a child, less in Middlebury because the tech center's just down the hall, as opposed to Virgins and Bristol, where they have to get on a bus or drive their car down to Middlebury to take advantage of that. So do we put those kinds of tech programs back into comprehensive high schools, or do we have a countywide high school that has a comprehensive nature to it, that has a tech center attached, and to walk down the hall, even in Middlebury, to walk down the hall, there's a tuition involvement there, and that affects taxpayers in the Middlebury district and ACSD to pay for that kid to go walk down the hall, which inhibits that, because you have to put in the budget X number of students that you're going to pay that tuition for. That always seems like a really big problem in terms of helping our children be ready for electricians and plumbers and cooks and carpenters and nurses and those kinds of trades that you can't phone up India and have someone come fix your plumbing. It's got to be someone local. It has to be
Right.
one of our students now that goes into plumbing. How do we facilitate that?
Well, as a mother of two sons who went to a comprehensive high school, I watched kids appreciate the privilege of taking, an AP Calc class and then, a class that was more technical in nature, because all they had to do is go right down the hallway, and more importantly, they were all on the same schedule. So, all the courses were on the same schedule. I think, even though the Hannaford Tech Center is right next to Middlebury High School, they're on different schedules and different timetables. And so even if those timetables vary by 20 minutes, that sometimes can be something to overcome.
It's a hurdle or a roadblock.
It's a little bit of a barrier. And also, I think the way that our technical centers are set up, you really need to be a half day or a full day student in order to be enrolled properly, so that the tech centers can receive the proper funding, that enables their budgets to be covered by what grant money is possible, and in order for the state to approve the program. So those kinds of things get in the way of kids pursuing passions, and sometimes, particularly for students, pursuing a passion, a little bit at first is really important. And our tech center system across the state, works really hard to provide opportunities to do that. But for example, the way we have them set up now, they are not able to provide programming to 7th and 8th graders, which, that's really where, career opportunities catch fire. And if I could have a building trades program available to 8th graders in Addison Central, there'd be a line. And somehow once you get into the high school age and culture and community, some of those things shift a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think there are ways that we could be thinking about career in tech ed, in the state that would allow some of these opportunities to be come to kids when they're ready.
How could we make 8th grade carpentry or building trades? How could we make that available?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You always, of course, used to have wood shop, right? In some of those ways, and now it's a little bit more difficult to maintain all of those facilities in that way. I think the technical center is a wonderful resource for us, and I think one of the things I would be looking at are what are the ways to expand that programming so that kids can take advantage of that, in 7th and 8th grade. They're right down the road, so I think that's a good place to start, and I think they'd enjoy that. There's a drone club that one of the instructors at the technical center is starting up and running, and I think there are 20 kids, that are showing up for that, on club days or not club days, and so having that technical expertise available from industry folks, so close to us, removing some of those state barriers to that, I think would be really helpful.
My personal perspective is we have to do that. I took wood shop when I'm a tradesman. Auto mechanics is my trade. And I took wood shop when I was in school, and it was one of the things that got me up in the morning. Did I care about those academic things? Not so much. So I wanted to get there. I wanted to make that desk for my mom. I wanted to do the projects that I was able to do in woodshop, and it got me to school in the morning. Now, the trade I ended up was fixing cars, and that was partly at home, tinkering, probably more destroying my mother's car than it was fixing it. But you learn from those mistakes, and And I think we need to, my personal feeling is we need to make those things available to students, and we don't. We have these barriers, time, scheduling, busing, tuition, they all, you have to sort of decide in 8th grade, 9th grade that you're going to be an electrician, otherwise you can't do that full-time commitment to the tech center, which takes you away from your friend group and takes you away from the football games or whatever. And so I think that's a really big problem. I'm not quite sure how we solve it, but I think we need to.
I think the important thing is, to your point, to give kids the opportunity to pursue their passions at younger ages, to really facilitate that. MUMS, Middlebury Middle School has, some tech classes that where kids could get a taste of some of those things, but then those pathways kind of end, and so I think providing ways for students, which is what the high school is gearing up to do in spades next year with their Flexible Pathways team, it will really help just have more kids be passionate about things that are going to make a contribution to the society, and that floats all boats. So
it does, and it turns on the curiosity and the interest and the involvement of students. My sister teaches robotics in a middle school situation in Canada, and she's gone international with the program, and these kids really get excited about this stuff. And it's silly in a sense. Here you are. You're going to build a machine that's able to throw a ball over the fence or whatever is their project, and yet they get totally involved in that.
And you've solved a problem. You've created a solution. You've gone through many stages of trial and error. You've probably had to work with a group. All of these things are, this is what makes us, all good in the professional world. Our ability to do those things. It doesn't matter how much we know. It matters, how much we can perform many of those characteristics. So I'm pleased to be able to be of service in Addison Central and watch the good things that are happening for kids and maybe help those along here and there. It's a wonderful place to come to work every day. So yeah.
That's great. What message might you have for the legislature as they ponder changes? We mentioned earlier. If things were status quo, you know what to deal with, but they probably aren't going to be status quo. What might your message be to state leaders about what they ought to be doing?
I guess my great-grandfather served in the legislature. We were talking about that earlier, and I am somebody who believes deeply in public service, and I believe that when you are making public policy, you need to do that in the public eye, and that needs to be, I think, a priority for both the governor's office and the legislative branch. I mean, I think whatever we're doing, we need to be doing together. Sometimes when you're making tough policy decisions, it's tempting to do a bit more of that behind closed doors than might be done to make policy that people feel confident in, because it can sometimes feel easier, and I don't think this is a time for people to take the easy road relative to those things. I think if there are hard conversations to have, we just need to have them together, and when I have seen that done or participated in that in the state, we've been able to come through it. My grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse off Greenbush, and she, in the later stages of her career, went to Ferrisburg Central. And when those little one-room schoolhouses closed, and that was a pivotal part of the state, and those days were really hard and difficult, and there have been many other waves of hard and difficult in different forms over time, and I think Vermonters know how to have hard conversations. We just need we just need to be doing that together if that's important, so that we can make sure we're going in a direction that people feel good about. So I guess that would be certainly one message. I think another, would be that it's essential to take some of these theoretical policy conversations into the details. I think the legislature ran into some snags during the last legislative session, and they realized that one of the things that they'd put in place needed some adjustment mid-course, and that's unnecessary. I think reaching out to practitioners, whether they're superintendents or principals or those in the field that are close to the operational details, to be able to participate in planning. I think that's really essential, and
for them to ask the question, does this work?
Yeah, exactly. Right. If we were to go about this, how does that work in your district? What are the things that we need to be thinking about? What are the pros? What are the cons? I don't think there's anybody in the system that doesn't think that we need to make some adjustments based on where we are now. I read something that Vermont Public released the other day that our population now is less than it was during the time of the Civil War in Vermont. I hadn't heard that before, but it caught me a little bit by surprise.
That's interesting, because I just read that in the 60s, before the big immigration to the state in the late 50s and early 60s, we only had about 450,000 in the state, and now we have 650,000. So I guess the population has been a roller coaster.
Yeah, that might be the case, which I think would connect to my point, which is, we are where we are right now in time. It doesn't mean 10 years from now this is going to be where we are, or 10 years ago this is where we are, and I think, approaching it from that standpoint of how do we manage our time right now in a good way, so that, we're setting ourselves well for the next time that comes, whether that's 10 years from now or 20 years from now, looking at things over the span of time. Yeah. I think that's important, maintaining our perspective and not being reactive. I think those things, they're all related to our pragmatic Vermont, right, roots in that way. And so I guess those were the messages that I would have for the people who are serving, and thank them for their service. It's not easy work.
Well, and thank you for your service. I have often said, that the work that superintendents, teachers, staff members do in our schools are so important. Children are our most valuable resource, without question. And,
agreed.
If we don't put the time and effort into that category, then we've lost a lot of what Vermont is all about. Yeah.
I agree.
So thank you so much for joining us today. Our time is up. It seems to go rather quickly. And thank you for listening. And that's the wrap on another issue of Sharpe Takes.